okay, we're continuing to make this world. We have a delivery that has to be done like by tomorrow.
Hey,
and
but I
like,
love that you're crying.
yeah,
Let's go get waffles.
100%. So it was a really intense experience, but it was really fun to be, so in it at that point. I mean, I was literally the most in a thing I think I've ever been. It was wild.
So fun.
I would start by saying this is gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
The art is amazing and it's so easy to understand. My one criticism, how do you give me nightmares as an example, guys? Come on. A body covered in mouths? What are you doing?
You're welcome.
I was reading this last night. I'm like, come on, don't do that.
It's part of that like weird mix of like cosmic gothic body horror that we're so excited about. It was a lot of fun, and body covered in mouths is I'm trying to remember where that came from. I think that was that.
It might have been week one. I feel like
week one.
Even just week one of me being on the project was just brainstorming the most icky, terrifying creatures we could.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that development process of the game itself as well as the world of Candela Obscura?
I was brought in when the project already was up, and sort of like did my best to take the illuminated worlds that was being developed by Strash and Layla and the concept that Taliesin had, and sort of mash the two together and figure out how to make them play nice. And so that was like the first couple weeks of me being brought on the project, and very quickly I realized that I needed somebody who I could collaborate with on creating and crafting what our version of the mythos would be. And so I reached out to somebody that I knew, who was Rowan, who I consider a mythologist. She has a podcast that that covers like all sorts of myths. And so it was like, I need somebody who can not only like synthesize myths, but also recontextualize myths, right? To create something new. And so so that's it. And that is exactly what Rowan does. So I brought Rowan in, and immediately we started working together very well. And she was brought in literally for a week first, just to like help form stuff. And then I got her for another week, and then I got her for another month. And then and then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, she's on this project for good, and now she's full-time here at Critical Role. So I don't know if you can talk about your experience after you got brought on.
Yeah, I mean, it went exactly how you described, except for me. I was like, oh, I get another week. There was a bit of giddiness, but I think the really cool thing that you did, realizing how important mythology and lore was when you're building an adjacent world like the Fairlands Hale, where there's so many touch points that we know, but it's just to the right of what is the real world. If you dive into those stories, those really, really old stories that we all tell each other, from campfires and caves all the way to now, and really see what the through line is, it allows people to ground themselves with much more ease in a place that might otherwise seem really daunting. So putting those touchstones of lore in the Fairlands happened really early in the process of creating this game. And I think that some folks might think that perhaps that was like a back end of things, but it was developed in tandem with the mechanics in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then can you talk to me about collaborating with Darrington Press and Critical Role? Because this project definitely seems close to, like you were saying, Taliesin, Jaffe's Heart, and Mercy, right?
We were really lucky in that I got brought in originally in the concept for an investigative horror game that had, was like spooky vibes, turn of the century, was kind of what they knew they wanted to do, but they weren't. They were exploring a lot of different ways in which to do that. And so I got brought in and got to kind of pitch my take on how that should be done, which is fictional world and mechanics that reinforce investigation as its core premise, meaning that the stats that your characters have are not typical like D&D stats. Like there's 3 different stats that are kind of used for like an investigate stat. If you see in the character, there's like focus, survey, and read. And all of those normally might just be like a perception check or something, right? Like, or an insight check if you're playing D&D. But that is not the case here, where like we're specifically going, you can read it, you can be good at reading a person, you can be good at surveying a place, you can be good at focusing on a thing. And so that allows different characters to specialize in the kind of investigation that they're good at. If it's going to be an investigation game and we're all going to be investigating, then we need to all be able to investigate differently. That's what's interesting. So I kind of got to come in and give my take on that, and got the green light to keep developing. And so after that, I mean, we brought in. We had a team that was around us every once in a while that would weigh in, but for the most part, they were very kind and open to us just going off and developing stuff. And then I think at the end of the year, we ended up pitching again our full concept for the Fairlands and all of that, and then we just started writing after the end of the year, and it was just a sprint to the finish line.
Allison is such a phenomenal collaborator, because anytime that he would come into the office, he'd have recommendations for 5 esoteric books that were just fantastic. Yeah. And when I first met him, he was so enthusiastic. We were talking about Candela, and he was trying to suss out how much I knew about history so that he wasn't over explaining it to me, but so that we could have this really enthusiastic conversation. And as soon as he realized that I had kind of the basis of knowledge that he did, it was like we were sprinting. I think maybe we sat down and talked for an hour that felt like 5 minutes. And having both Taliesin and Marisha be so enthusiastic is an incredible boon to the project.
And then one of my favorite parts of the gameplay are the scars, because I love that this is a world where you are going to face the consequences of your action, and you have to think about that with your actions. Can you talk a little bit about the scars, kind of what inspired them and what you're really excited to see players do with them?
Horror as a genre has just this beautiful legacy of allowing people to deal with the really difficult parts of the real world. We hear about it a lot with Mike Flanagan, Guillermo del Toro talk about it, the fact that we are very much our own monsters. And in tackling the scars mechanic, we wanted to facilitate that exploration at the table, but you can't really dive into these vulnerable topics unless everybody feels safe at the table. So we put a lot of work into ensuring that the sandbox that we built would be a place that people could explore the topics that they were interested in. Spenser and I really like to play games that explore the topic of grief. So that's something that I think you can see infused into it. But the really interesting part about scars is reckoning with how your character's changed, both mechanically and through RP. So when you take a scar, you move your stats, and that has unexpectedly, or perhaps expectedly, I don't know, to me it was unexpected, become one of the most fun parts of Candela.
Yeah, I think mechanically it was, we explored a lot of different stuff, and when we played the version where the scars shifted your actions, it was immediately apparent. We kind of knew when the idea was conceived that like, oh, that'd be kind of cool, because it doesn't punish you, it just changes you. But when it happened in play and we watched somebody go, oh, I got bit on the leg, and I took a scar from that, I'm moving more, I'm shifting more points into move, because I'm getting out of the way so much faster, and I'm moving them out of survey because I'm no longer looking at my surroundings as well. I'm worried about not getting hit. Mm-hmm. It told a story about the character in a way that I think as a game designer, it's one of those mechanics that like specifically does a thing that you always are striving to do with mechanics, which is like, it's such a little thing and it tells a whole story.
And the other interesting conversation we were having recently with folks was, in games, D&D is a good example. As you level up, you're kind of going, we all call it God mode. You're just getting increasingly more powerful. You're able to handle bigger and scarier foes. But in Candela Obscura, which is fundamentally a story about normal people doing their best against incredible odds, as you go on in the campaign, you're actually more likely to die because you have more marks, you have more scars. And it was a really interesting light bulb moment in this conversation saying, oh, if you level up the bad guys as these people go on, they're essentially experiencing burnout. They're trying to go for as long and as far as they can, and they might not make it to the end of the campaign under normal circumstances. And if you keep leveling up the bad guys, there almost certainly someone won't make it. And that is another piece of the mechanics that tells you what this world is like. And it is brutal.
And then one of my favorite parts of the book, unexpectedly, was the section about the legacy of harm and horror. Because I love how you guys kind of explain a little bit of the history, why it's important to approach it respectfully and responsibly, and to approach it from a story standpoint. Can you talk about why it was important to include that section of the book?
There's no other portion of the book that has been edited as much and received as much care and as many eyes as that section of the book. And it was something that we started really early and kept me up nights trying to get it correct. It's a tricky conversation, I think, a lot of times when we talk about mental health and history, because we want things to be right or wrong or black and white. At least I know I do sometimes. And playing a game that tackles specifically mental health can be fraught if you don't handle it with care. And saying you have to care for the people at your table while also throwing terrifying monsters at them could seem like it's in conflict, but in fact, it's really not if you sit down and you have the discussion. And Spenser, I think you've given me a really good example, which is in a game that you played. You ran a creature that was like a sleep paralysis demon because a player asked to tackle that. I had previously been lined from that type of creature. The lurking in the shadows had been lined from the game, and they came to you and said, I want to tackle this now. This is the day I defeat the monsters. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about the way that defeating the monster can be incredibly empowering, but you have to have an incredibly strong foundation to get there.
Yeah, well, I mean, and horror, as the section sort of goes into, has quite a legacy of the way in which it treats physical, mental health. And when we're asking you to take brain scars or brain marks, we're essentially telling you things are getting stressful or scary to the point where your character is changing because of that. And done well, like you said, it can be really impactful. It can really allow you to explore like the inner turmoil and like I also think of like the heroicness in the sense that like despite all odds we are going back out in the field and we're doing what we know we have to do to save the world. Even though I'm scared, even though now I'm afraid of small spaces, or I have a fear of water. I'm jumping back in the river because I have to save my friend who just got pulled under. And so that's what bravery is, right? Bravery is being afraid and doing it anyways. And so, but in order to do that, we have to have that conversation. And so when we were talking about like writing the book, right? Not just playing the game, because like one of the things that I think is from the game design side is from people that are used to playing games, like there is a separation between like what it takes to make a game that is playable and what it takes to make a game that is in a book. Like it is such a further jump to like make an entire 200-page book that has every rule you could possibly need and all sorts of guidance and GM stuff than it is to like print out character sheets and teach you how to play. And so when we sat down to like really make the book, we knew that that was one of the sections that like we always talk about at our table, but that needed to be in text.
And we have discussed this specifically in regards to that chapter, which is when building the sandbox for Candela Obscura, we are not trying to make a place for one universal experience that is the way that horror is. That's not feasible. We're trying to make a place where people can build incredibly individualized personal experiences, because the way that I take a brain scar or a body scar or any type of scar from the same attack would be fundamentally different for me than it would be for you. And I think that's where the meat is. That's where the really interesting story is, right in that spot of difference.
Can you talk to me about the world building and developing the history for the Fairlands and Candela Obscura? Because I'm a huge fan of world building. So when I was like, oh, this is an entire section, I'm in.
Yeah, well, it was really exciting because we sat down to develop out what this fictional region was, and I think we just started putting together a pitch deck from scratch, just like, let's come up with a name. Okay, let's come up with like what are the, I was like, we're gonna do 13 districts, right?
The names of the places, of the name of the country and the name of the city and the underground city, all, and the systems power all come up with in the first 2 hours of world building.
So it was like very quickly, we just threw stuff at the wall and then started moving. And I know this is your baby, so I want to let you talk about it more than me. Rowan did so much hard work on this world. It's still jaw dropped from the amount of effort and like Herculean effort that you put into developing this. But it is a place that we hope people feel welcome to play in, no matter who they are. And I don't know if you want to talk about like what the process was for us.
One of the big pillars of design in building this world is there is always something beneath. What is beneath? The world beneath the world. So Candela Obscura is investigating the magic that is behind the scenes from what we're all doing in our daily lives. Underneath New Fair, we have Old Fair. That's our ancient Greece, ancient Roman analog. Our Atlantis that played with magic, and then their civilization collapsed. Now, on top of that, we have New Fair that's discovering electricity, building these incredible technological advancements. They're repeating history. How is that going to affect them? We have the last Great War that just happened. And then we have this mirror of a war against the magical forces happening in Candela. So I hope that when people explore this place, they kind of always find these different facets that echo the same themes. But so much of the world building is giving people hooks, giving people places and interesting details where they can then insert the portions of their own story that's happening at the table. So it's like saying, at this site, there's a rumor that something spooky happened, but we don't want to outline every little detail about it, because with the room in the story, then players can take their own imagination to it, and they'll feel much more ownership of it, and it'll feel lighter lift to pick up.
One of the things that we did specifically with Old Fair is there was a time where we were talking about having a map of New Fair, and then you flip the page, and underneath that is the map of Old Fair, like how it lays out beneath the Fairlands. And very quickly we decided to not do that, specifically to go the opposite direction on that, and to say, these are the Old Fair sites that we're going to give you in the book. We don't tell you where they are, because when I was running, Rowan was running, we would have players that had specific things that they wanted to explore, that their backstory called for. And I would want to integrate those beneath places that they are or that they're going that relate to another character's backstory. And so if I want to put an entrance to the ziggurat, like beneath the speakeasy in the Varnish, I can do that. nothing's stopping. The book doesn't contradict me in that way. And so in that sense, Old Fair is kind of a toolbox for you to use the things that you need and want out of a campaign wherever they fit for you as a circle.
Old Fair exists almost entirely in lore.
Right.
It exists in that space where we all put the lore that interests us. So ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Egyptology, when we all went through that phase of obsession, it exists in the grand imagination of the people in this world. So being able to move it around and allow Candela to actually know where it is incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. I think about other approaches that we took. I mean, there's so much. It was so much world building in a compacted amount of time. It was so fun.
We really stratified the economic tiers in new and old fair. And I guess that's true.
New and old fair,
but mostly in new fair. That was one of the things that was very important, to take an incredible diversity in wealth. A lot of people on this end of the spectrum, and a lot of people on this end of the spectrum, and then show that physically in the space. So New Fair is built on a slope going this way toward the sea, and it is also built on top of an ancient civilization. So you can show people that folks have less wealth because they are literally built down, while the people who are more wealthy are built on top of the shelves of ancient buildings, so they're safer. And I think having physical representations of very important social cues like that is really important in a horror game.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Eaves is a place that's built on top of South Soffit, which is like basically the Eaves are like on the very top of this ancient building, and then South Soffit is below that, and there are it's essentially like layers and layers of the poorest people that make their way up South Soffit to the Eaves to work. And so we see this literal, like, they are sitting on top of them. It's not a subtle metaphor. But one of the interesting pieces, and I think we pulled this from, I can't remember where it was. It was some ancient civilization, might have been Rome, or I can't remember. But anyway, it might have been Greece actually. But the higher you are in South Soffit, we think of now like the penthouse is the most expensive place. But in South Soffit, the higher you are off the ground in this sort of unstable place, the less wealthy you are until you get to the top where there's another piece of stability, because it is so much more dangerous to live high up.
We came up with that after we learned about kitchens in Pompeii being small because they were hot and had fire. And we realized that an enclosed place with fires being closer to the top and the smoke would be a lot less desirable.
So anyway, lots of drawing from history and, from real world examples to create the balance.
It's so rich, and I think you guys do a really good job of balancing, giving us a lot of detail and a lot of world while allowing players and GMs to really make it their own. One of the details I loved in the book was you guys were like, here's key information, here's key details, here are key people, but also here's questions to ask.
Yeah.
we love to play with questions.
I know. It's the thing. I mean, I feel like so much of our world building in the room is asking each other questions. And so
the answers are for the table.
Right.
The questions are for us.
Yeah. and the more we're able to like pull players and GMs in and allow them to have enough scaffolding that they feel supported, but not so much like of a building that they feel as though they have to scale it in order to like know it. Like we hope that we've given you enough to like make you excited and to like spark the imagination, and then ask you questions that allow you to bring you and your tables like sensibilities, themes, things you're excited about to the world to really make it your own.
That's one of the reasons I think relationship questions are so important in the book. Having the relationship questions has, throughout playtesting, unequivocally improved gameplay every single time that we utilize them.
No doubt.
Because so much of horror is found in the relationships, in the way they're tested, in the way they're broken. And when you invest in your other players and make these decisions about your relationships above board, then you know what to give each other as you're playing. You know how to lob the ball up and then hit it out of the park.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Relationships are a thing that I think are often overlooked in the development of games sometimes, and especially in this genre.
Because we're all nerds and people love to go off and write little novels.
Yeah, but I think that like by establishing those, horror is about being scared. But for me, horror is about being afraid for the people around me.
Yes.
And wanting to save them. And if I don't care about the people around me in a deep way, or I don't have an emotional anchor to those people, then I'm not worried when they disappear. Mm-hmm. Right. So and Candela being more of a mid-form game, like it being, especially in the show, 3 episodes, right? Like we have to care about each other immediately. We don't have 20, 50, 100 episodes to become to build those relationships over time. And most campaigns, I think, sadly, are not Critical Role length, right? Like most campaigns that people run are like 20 sessions. And so if I'm going to play 20 sessions, I need from session 1 for it to be emotionally impactful.
I was curious, Spenser, if GMing like a chapter of the Candela Obscura show changed your perspective on anything from the game itself.
I think that I ran the game so much before. No. It's so funny because I ran the game so much before getting on camera for almost the crew that was on camera that like by the time I got there, they're like, just do the thing that you do. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we just played how we normally play, and we went really hard, and they were like, we want this to be scary. We want it to be like, we want to ramp up the tension. We want death to be on the table very early. Where, the mindset was like, if somebody died in episode 2, that wouldn't be bad. Mm-hmm. So like we really went out hard. And I mean, Luis even took a scar at the beginning of the game because he was like, I think my character is already on their way, right? And so he took a scar before we even started playing, and I think that kind of showed the style of play that we were all on board for. And so I think in some ways it just showed me how far we could take it, right? We really push it to its limits.
And no rest for the wicked.
Oh my God.
When we were
the reason why you're laughing, I think.
The reason why I was laughing is because when they were filming chapter 2, we were still finishing the book. And so I was sitting behind the curtain while they were writing the book. And anytime there was a break, Spenser, I'd grab him and you're with me. I'm so sorry. And we'd talk about things that we were working on. And I'd put some earworms in his ears of like information so that he didn't have to rack his brain for whatever. And he would tell me what I should be working on. And then he'd go out and do it. And then at the end of the episode, we'd go to Denny's and we'd write more, and you turn around and do it again the next day.
Yeah. So like literally was jumping off of the episode after finishing like the most intense roleplay thing that I've ever done, and then jumping immediately into like, okay, we're continuing to make this world. We have a delivery that has to be done like by tomorrow.
Hey,
and
but I love that you're crying. Let's go get waffles.
100%. So it was a really intense experience, but it was really fun to be so in it at that point. I mean, I was literally the most in a thing I think I've ever been. It was wild.
So fun.
You're fantastic as a GM, and I love within 5 minutes that you traumatized Travis.
Alicia's just saying she's calling last question for us because we're gonna have to run. So she was sorry. Anyway. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a blast to watch the cast revel in horror at some of the things that I and the rest of the cast did. We really all worked together. I mean, a lot of the story that we told came from the backstory of the players. So almost none of it was made of whole cloth. It was all collaboration.
And Travis is the best. He's like quaking in his boots and also like, I love this.
I feel kinship with him with horror because like I went to a haunted house with some friends a couple weeks ago, including my friend who's like 2 kids came, fully grabbed the 9-year-old and was like, you're in front of me. I can't do this. So I was like, I get it.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Like I said, I love the book. I love the show. I'm so excited to play it. I have friends who are already like, when are we doing this though? So I'm so excited.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for playing it. It's been our labor of love for the last year now. I think that October was actually when you came in, and so it's been a whole year of Candela for us, and we're really excited that people are finally getting it in their hands.
You'll have to let us know how your game's going.
Yeah.